Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Savannah, Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know what places and what times of day or night these documented stories reach. The year was 1841. Savannah, Georgia stood as a testament to Southern prosperity, its cobblestone streets lined with grand homes and lush squares adorned with Spanish moss-draped oaks. But beneath this veneer of gentility, something sinister lurked on a plantation just beyond the city limits. A well, seemingly ordinary in its construction, would become the focal point of a tale so disturbing that efforts were made to strike it from official records completely. The Thornhill Plantation sat approximately 12 miles southwest of Savannah proper, nestled between the Ogeechee River and what was then called Ferguson's Creek. The property belonged to the Whitmore family, who had established themselves as cotton merchants of considerable means. From the main road, the plantation appeared unremarkable, a large white house with imposing columns, surrounded by fields that stretched toward the horizon. What distinguished this property, however, was an unusually deep, well-positioned, not near the main house, as was customary, but rather at the far edge of the property, adjacent to a small grove of cypress trees. According to county records from 1839, the well was dug under the supervision of Augustus Whitmore, the plantation's owner, who insisted on its peculiar location despite the inconvenience it posed to the household. A receipt found in the Chatham County Historical Archives, dated March 12, 1839, shows payment to 6 laborers specifically for excavation of water source at the southern boundary. What's curious is the amount, nearly triple the standard rate for well digging at that time. The document also notes that work continued through the hours of darkness, an unusual practice for such labor. The well itself, as described in a surveyor's report commissioned by Whitmore in 1840, reached a depth of 67 feet, far deeper than necessary to access the water table in that region. The report mentions additional modifications to the standard design, though these modifications are not described in detail. The surveyor, one James Harrington, added a personal note at the bottom of the document expressing his professional reservations about certain aspects of the construction, though he too refrains from specifying the nature of these concerns. Harrington's subsequent correspondence with the county clerk's office, preserved in the Georgia State Archives, requests that his name be removed from all documentation related to the Whitmore property. His letter, dated January 17, 1841, states cryptically that involvement with that particular project may prove detrimental to my professional reputation. Harrington relocated to Augusta shortly thereafter, never again practicing his trade in the Savannah area. The first indication that something was amiss came in the autumn of 1841. A traveling merchant named Thomas Hewitt stopped at the Whitmore plantation seeking shelter for the night, as was common practice for the time. According to an account he later gave to a newspaper in Charleston, he was welcomed by the family, but instructed never to venture near the well after sundown. When he inquired about this strange prohibition, the household fell silent, and the subject was abruptly changed. What Hewitt observed during his brief stay was a household governed by unusual tensions. In his published account, he noted that servants would only approach certain areas of the property in pairs, never alone. The family's domestic routines seemed organized specifically to ensure that no one needed to pass near the well after dusk. Most peculiar was Hewitt's observation that Augustus Whitmore's study contained an unusual number of books related to medical practices, strange for a man ostensibly engaged in agriculture and commerce. That night, Hewitt claimed he was awakened by what he described as a sound unlike any I have encountered in my considerable travels, neither human nor animal, but something that seemed to emanate from deep within the earth itself. Curiosity overcame his better judgment, and he slipped out of the guest quarters to investigate. What Hewitt witnessed that night would prompt his hasty departure at first light. In his account, published in the Charleston Mercury on November 3, 1841, he described seeing Augustus Whitmore and his eldest son standing at the edge of the well, lowering what appeared to be a heavy bundle into its depths. The merchant noted that both men worked in complete silence, their movements practiced and precise. Most disturbing was Hewitt's observation that the younger Whitmore's hands appeared stained with some dark substance even in the dim moonlight. As he watched from the concealment of nearby shrubs, Hewitt claimed to hear a sound from within the well that might have been water movement, but possessed a quality more akin to respiration, as if the well itself drew breath. More alarming still was his account of seeing something that appeared to reach upward from the darkness below. Not a human hand, precisely, but a form that suggested fingers, though elongated beyond natural proportion. Hewitt's account might have been dismissed as the imaginings of a superstitious traveler had it not coincided with the disappearance of Edmund Farley, overseer of the neighboring Colston plantation. Farley had reportedly confronted Whitmore about a boundary dispute just days before he vanished. According to testimony given by Farley's assistant, recorded in a sheriff's report dated October 29, 1841, the overseer had threatened to expose some manner of unholy business being conducted on Whitmore land. The assistant, Martin Green, provided additional details in a private letter to Farley's brother in Virginia, a document that came to light only decades later. In this correspondence, Green mentioned that Farley had observed unusual activity around the Whitmore well during his nighttime patrols of the property boundary. He spoke of lights when no lanterns should be present, Green wrote, and sounds that he could not attribute to any natural source. Most disturbing was his claim of seeing Augustus Whitmore emerging from the well itself rather than merely standing beside it, a physical impossibility unless the shaft contains more than is apparent from above ground. The sheriff's initial investigation yielded little. The Whitmores maintained that Farley had simply moved on, perhaps returning north as many disillusioned overseers did. When questioned about the well, Augustus Whitmore explained it was merely used for irrigation purposes and had been placed far from the house due to the superior quality of water found at that location. The matter might have ended there, relegated to local gossip, had it not been for the drought of 1842. As water sources throughout the region began to dry up, neighboring plantations increasingly relied on one another for access to functioning wells. According to the Journal of Rebecca Colston, wife of the plantation owner whose overseer had disappeared, several workers were sent to draw water from the Whitmore well in early June 1842. Her entry dated June 7th reads, "The men returned without water, speaking of a foul odor rising from the Whitmore well. They refused to approach it again, claiming the water had been tainted by something unnatural." Samuel, her husband, dismisses their concerns as Negro superstition, but I cannot help but wonder if there is some connection to poor Mr. Farley's disappearance. Rebecca's subsequent entries document increasing tension between the two plantations. She notes that her husband had begun to station armed men along the property boundary, particularly near the well site. "Samuel will not speak of it directly," she wrote on June 10th, "but I sense he knows more than he acknowledges. Twice now I have found him awake before dawn, staring toward the Whitmore property with an expression I have never before witnessed on his face. Not fear precisely, but a dread so profound it has aged him visibly." This journal entry coincides with another curious document, a request filed by Augustus Whitmore to the county office for permission to seal an existing well and dig a new one closer to the main house. The request, dated June 9, 1842, was approved without question. The old well was filled in and, by all official accounts, forgotten. Yet an entry in the personal diary of County Clerk William Foster, discovered during a renovation of the county records building in 1921, suggests the matter was not so simply resolved. Foster wrote on June 12, 1842, "Commissioner Harrison returned from the Whitmore property in a state of considerable agitation. He insisted that no record be kept of his visit beyond the formal approval for the new well construction. When pressed He would say only that the current well had been compromised in a manner that precludes its continued use. He has requested a leave of absence, citing urgent family matters requiring his attention in Atlanta. Harrison's abrupt departure from his post, he would never return to Savannah, adds another layer of mystery to the events surrounding the Whitmore well. His successor found the relevant files unusually sparse, with several documents apparently removed. A note in the new commissioner's log, dated July 3, 1842, expresses frustration at the disorganized state of records pertaining to certain properties southwest of the city, suggesting deliberate removal rather than mere administrative neglect. But the story of the well refused to remain buried. In 1847, a severe storm struck the region, bringing unprecedented rainfall. According to meteorological records kept by the Savannah harbor master, over 15 inches of rain fell in a 3-day period, causing widespread flooding and soil erosion. It was during this deluge that the ground above the sealed well reportedly collapsed, exposing what one witness described as a chamber of horrors. This account comes from Jeremiah Tate, a land surveyor who had been assessing flood damage in the area. His personal correspondence, preserved in the Georgia Historical Society archives, describes how the torrential rains had washed away the soil covering the old well, revealing not just an ordinary shaft, but what appeared to be an expanded chamber below ground. Tate's letter to his brother in Augusta, dated April 29, 1847, contains the following passage. "What I observed defies rational explanation. The collapsed earth revealed not merely a well shaft, but what appeared to be a deliberately expanded cavity beneath the ground. Within this space were objects that I hesitate to describe in detail, save to say that they appeared to be personal effects. A pocket watch, a man's boot, several buttons from what must have been a fine coat. All these items scattered among darker materials that I dare not identify with certainty. Most disturbing was a length of chain affixed to the stone wall of the chamber. Brother, I have surveyed many properties in my 20 years of practice, but never have I encountered something that so immediately filled me with dread. I left the site at once and reported my findings to the authorities." In a second letter, dated May 5, 1847, Tate elaborated on his experience with evident reluctance. "I find myself unable to sleep since that day," he wrote. "Not from fear alone, though that remains, but from the implications of what I glimpsed in that brief moment before prudence compelled my retreat. The chamber walls bore markings, not random scratches, but deliberate inscriptions, reminiscent of anatomical diagrams I once saw in a medical text, though distorted in ways that suggest either profound ignorance or a perspective on human anatomy that diverges dramatically from accepted understanding. Most disturbing was Tate's description of what he called growth anomalies emerging from the chamber walls. They resembled roots at first glance, he wrote, but their movement, responsive to my presence, indicated a nature wholly different from botanical matter. They appeared to reach toward me with purpose, retracting only when exposed to direct sunlight. I cannot escape the impression that what I witnessed was neither fully plant nor animal, but something existing in an indeterminate state between recognized categories. The subsequent investigation was curiously brief. According to county records, officials visited the site on May 2, 1847, but their report mentions only a collapsed well shaft with evidence of normal debris accumulation. No mention was made of Tate's more disturbing observations. The discrepancy between Tate's detailed description and the official report suggests either that the surveyor had grossly exaggerated what he saw or that something more troubling was at play: the deliberate suppression of information. Adding to this suspicion is the fact that within weeks of the investigation, Augustus Whitmore sold the plantation to a business associate from Charleston and relocated his family to New Orleans. The sale was conducted with unusual haste, the property changing hands for significantly less than its appraised value according to tax records from that year. The bill of sale, preserved in county records, contains an unusual stipulation that the purchaser agrees to maintain the present condition of all existing water management structures without modification or excavation. This clause, atypical for such transactions, carried a severe financial penalty for noncompliance, suggesting Whitmore's profound concern that the sealed well remain undisturbed. The new owner, Harold Mercer, seemed either unaware of or unconcerned by the plantation's disturbing history. However, his tenure on the property would be short-lived. In a letter to his sister dated September 15, 1847, Mercer complained of persistent illness affecting both himself and his household staff. He described symptoms of fatigue, disorientation, and in some cases, hallucinations. The doctor suggests it may be a miasma rising from the marshy areas of the property, Mercer wrote, but I cannot help but notice that these afflictions began shortly after we resumed use of the newly reopened well. In subsequent correspondence, Mercer's descriptions of the property's strange atmosphere grow increasingly detailed and disturbing. He writes of an oppressive quality to the air near certain portions of the land, and dreams shared by unrelated members of the household, all featuring descent into confined spaces and encounters with entities neither human nor animal. Most specifically, he notes that vegetation near the old well site exhibited unusual characteristics, growing with unnatural rapidity but producing fruit of distressing appearance, misshapen, and bearing unusual colorations. By December 1847, Mercer had abandoned the plantation entirely, leaving it in the care of a property manager. The manager's quarterly reports, still preserved in the Chatham County records, show a steady decline in the property's productivity. The final report, filed in June 1848, contains a curious notation: water from main well, now unsuitable for consumption or irrigation, strange coloration and persistent odor. Recommend immediate drilling of new water source. An appendix to this report, marked confidential and separated from the main document in the archives, elaborates on the manager's growing concerns. Workers refused to approach the southeastern section of the property under any circumstances. 3 who were compelled to clear brush in that area subsequently fled without collecting wages. Their belongings remain unclaimed. Most alarming is the condition of the livestock that grazed near the old well site. Their behavior grew erratic, followed by physical alterations too grotesque to detail here. All affected animals have been destroyed and buried at the far boundary of the property. The property changed hands several more times over the next decade, never remaining under the same ownership for more than 2 years. Local newspapers occasionally referenced the cursed Whitmore land in passing, though no detailed accounts were published. This changed in 1859, when a journalist from the northern publication Harper's Weekly traveled south to document plantation life. William Thorne, the journalist in question, had heard rumors about the abandoned Whitmore property, by then overgrown and falling into ruin. His published account describes the eerie atmosphere of the deserted plantation, noting that local residents refused to approach the property after sundown. Thorne, dismissing such notions as superstition, camped on the grounds for 3 nights in April 1859. His article, titled "A Night Among Ghosts, Southern Superstitions Examined," intended to debunk the supernatural claims surrounding the property. What he recorded instead was a detailed account of unusual phenomena he could not readily explain. On the 2nd night of his stay, Thorne wrote that he was awakened by a sound resembling the strained breathing of a man in considerable distress. Following the sound to its source led him to the filled-in well at the property's edge. There, according to his account, the noises intensified, a succession of sounds that might be interpreted as pleading, though no distinct words could be discerned. More disturbing was what Thorne observed at dawn. The ground surrounding the former well site appeared to pulse slightly, as if something beneath exerted periodic pressure against the earth itself, he wrote. More alarming still was the discovery that my boots, left outside the tent overnight, had been partially enveloped by what appeared to be root structures, though none were visible the previous evening. These roots, if such they were, retreated into the soil when exposed to direct sunlight, moving with a rapidity no botanical specimen should possess. Thorne's article took an unexpected turn from its original skeptical premise. While I maintain that there must exist some natural explanation for the phenomena I experienced, he wrote, I can no longer dismiss entirely the possibility that some terrible event has left its imprint upon this place. The well, in particular, seems to be a focal point for disturbances that defy conventional understanding. An unpublished draft of the article, discovered among Thorne's papers after his death in 1862, contains passages omitted from the final version. In these sections, Thorne describes collecting soil samples from near the well site for analysis. The material exhibits properties I cannot reconcile with known soil types, he wrote. Under magnification, particles move independently, exhibiting characteristics more commonly associated with living tissue than inert matter. More disturbing still, when combined with water, the sample develops structures reminiscent of rudimentary vascular systems, as if attempting to organize itself into a more complex form. Following the publication of Thorne's article, local authorities in Savannah faced renewed pressure to investigate the property. Records from the sheriff's office show that a cursory examination was conducted in May 1859, but again, the official report dismissed any unusual findings. What's notable, however, is a private letter written by Deputy Sheriff Collins to his superior, uncovered in a collection of personal correspondence donated to the Georgia Historical Society in 1923. In this letter, Collins expresses reservations about the official report he was instructed to file. I must confess my discomfort with our conclusions, he wrote. Upon excavating the well to a depth of approximately 12 feet, we discovered what appeared to be a hidden passage extending horizontally from the main shaft. Time constraints prevented a thorough exploration, but I glimpsed what seemed to be tools of an unusual nature within this space. When I suggested we return with proper equipment to investigate further, I was firmly instructed by Mr. Harrison, the county commissioner, to seal the well permanently and consider the matter closed. Collins continued with observations that suggest the site's disturbances were not merely historical, but ongoing. The soil surrounding the shaft exhibited unusual properties, warmer than the ambient temperature would explain and possessing a consistency unlike normal earth. Most concerning were the sounds emanating from deeper within the passage, not water movement, but something suggestive of distant conversation, though no words could be distinguished. My fellow deputies heard it as well, though none would acknowledge it officially. The letter concludes with a request that Collins be assigned duties in the northern portion of the county, at some remove from the former Whitmore property. This request was apparently granted, as subsequent sheriff's reports bear different signatures for investigations in that area. The Civil War erupted shortly thereafter, and the Whitmore plantation, like many properties in the region, was largely forgotten as more pressing concerns occupied public attention. The land was seized by Union forces during their occupation of Savannah, then returned to civilian control after the war's conclusion. County records show it was purchased in 1866 by a northern investment company seeking to establish timber operations in the South. His dispatch to superiors, preserved in the National Archives, mentions unusual conditions affecting troop morale. Montgomery reports that soldiers refused to be stationed near the southeastern portion of the property, claiming disturbances during night watches and dreams of an unusually vivid and disturbing nature, shared by multiple unrelated personnel. Montgomery's final report before relocating his company includes a medical notation. 7 men have reported identical symptoms, lethargy, disorientation, and what the surgeon describes as circulatory anomalies manifesting as unusual coloration in the extremities. Curiously, military records from the Union occupation include a brief report from Captain Elijah Montgomery, who established a temporary camp on the property in January 1865. recommend immediate withdrawal from current position to more suitable grounds. The new owners dispatched a survey team to assess the property's resources. The team's report, filed in August 1866, contains an intriguing footnote. Area surrounding old well shaft shows unusual soil composition, darker, more fertile than surrounding land. Recommended for detailed soil analysis before agricultural use. No record exists of whether such analysis was ever conducted. What is documented, however, is the fate of the survey team's leader. According to an obituary published in the Savannah Republican on September 12, 1866, Edward Morton died suddenly of a wasting illness of unknown origin, just weeks after completing his assessment of the former Whitmore property. The obituary notes that before his death, Morton had been working on a detailed report of his findings at the plantation, but this document was never filed with his employers. Morton's personal diary, discovered among his effects and now held by the Georgia Historical Society, contains disturbing entries from his final days. "The dreams continue," he wrote on September 3, 1866, "always the same. I am descending into darkness, unable to climb back to the light, and always there are voices from below, calling me deeper." His final entry, dated September 7th, reads simply, "What we found in that well was never meant to be discovered." His physician noted pronounced changes in dermal coloration and texture and unexplained growths beneath the skin, primarily concentrated at the joints and along major blood vessels. Most puzzling was the doctor's observation that the patient's blood, when drawn, exhibits behavior inconsistent with normal human physiology, appearing to move with purpose, independent of gravitational influence. The investment company abandoned their plans for the property shortly after Morton's death. May God forgive what I've unleashed. Morton's medical records, obtained by historical researchers in the 1950s, describe symptoms that defied conventional diagnosis. For nearly 2 decades, the land remained unoccupied, acquiring a reputation among locals as a place to be avoided. This changed in 1885 when the property was purchased by the Savannah Agricultural College for use as a research station. Dr. Elias Pemberton, a professor of soil science, led a team that established experimental plots across the former plantation. According to his published research papers, Pemberton was particularly interested in the unusual soil composition near the old well site. His analysis, published in the American Journal of Agricultural Science in 1887, noted abnormally high levels of certain minerals and organic compounds in samples taken from that area. The soil exhibits properties that defy conventional categorization, Pemberton wrote. Its capacity to retain moisture exceeds that of any known soil type, while simultaneously demonstrating unusual electromagnetic properties detectable with even the most rudimentary equipment. Most notable is its apparent influence on botanical specimens grown within it, accelerated growth rates coupled with structural modifications to normal plant morphology. What Pemberton initially viewed as a scientific curiosity soon became something more troubling. In correspondence with a colleague at Harvard University, dated November 1887, he wrote, "The chemical composition alone cannot account for the soil's properties. Something else is at work here, something that defies conventional scientific understanding. Plants grown in this soil exhibit accelerated growth but die prematurely, their root systems strangely deformed. More disturbing still, small animals avoid the area entirely, and those forced to consume vegetation from this region display marked behavioral changes before their inevitable demise." Pemberton's research took an even more unusual turn in 1888 when he began investigating historical records related to the property. His notes, preserved in the college archives, show increasing preoccupation with the well and its history. The physical evidence suggests that the well shaft extends far deeper than would be necessary for ordinary water collection, he wrote, and the horizontal chamber discovered in 1859 implies a purpose beyond the well's stated function. More disturbing are Pemberton's observations regarding what he termed biological anomalies in the area surrounding the former well. Specimens collected within a 30-foot radius of the site demonstrate characteristics that suggest a blurring of normal taxonomic boundaries, he noted. Fungal growths exhibit movement typically associated with simple animals, while insect populations display collective behavior more commonly observed in colonial organisms. Most alarming are the rudimentary vascular structures discovered in soil samples, structures with no clear classification within established biological categories. In February 1889, Pemberton requested funding for a comprehensive excavation of the well site. His request was denied by the college administration, who cited budgetary constraints. Undeterred, Pemberton reportedly continued his investigation using personal funds. What he discovered remains largely unknown, as his subsequent reports were never officially filed with the college. A groundskeeper employed at the research station, however, later provided an account of Pemberton's activities during this period. In a statement given to a local historian in 1912, Samuel Wilson described observing Pemberton making frequent visits to the well site during pre-dawn hours. He would bring strange equipment, not standard scientific instruments, but devices of his own design, Wilson recalled. On several occasions, I saw him extract samples not just of soil, but of something else, something that moved within the containers he used. Once, when he didn't realize I was nearby, I heard him speaking, not to himself, but as if addressing something within the sealed well shaft. Most disturbing was that, on at least one occasion, I could have sworn something answered him from below. What does exist is a peculiar document found among Pemberton's personal effects after his sudden resignation from the faculty in April 1889. The document, written in what handwriting experts have confirmed to be Pemberton's, contains a series of disjointed observations and conclusions that border on the fantastical. The disappearances, not just Farley, but others, unrecorded and unmourned, supplied him with subjects for experiments no ethical practitioner would contemplate. The document goes on to suggest that Whitmore was attempting to develop some manner of treatment or procedure involving the prolongation of life through means most unnatural. Pemberton's notes become increasingly difficult to follow, with references to chambers where the subjects were kept, and modifications to standard anatomy that defy current medical understanding. In one particularly disturbing passage, Pemberton describes what he believes to be the nature of Whitmore's experiments. He sought not to extend life in its recognized form, but to establish a new state of being, neither living nor dead, but perpetually suspended between these conditions. The well served as more than a disposal site, the document states. It was a laboratory of sorts. Whitmore's medical training, largely unnoted in official biographies, provided him with knowledge that he applied to terrible purpose. The biological material I have extracted from the site suggests he achieved some measure of success, though at a cost that would horrify any civilized observer. What remains appears to retain characteristics of its original human form, but altered beyond recognition, capable of continued growth, adaptation, and response to stimuli, yet lacking the integrated consciousness we associate with true life. The final page of the document contains a passage that has puzzled historians and researchers ever since. I have seen what remains. Even after all these decades, they persist in a state that should not be possible. The implications are too terrible to contemplate, that death itself might be arrested, but at a cost that transforms the subject into something neither living nor properly deceased. More alarming still is the evident intelligence directing these processes, not the fragmented awareness of individual specimens, but a collective consciousness that extends throughout the affected area, growing in complexity with each passing year. It knows I have discovered it. It speaks to me in my dreams. Following his resignation, Pemberton reportedly left Savannah immediately, relocating to an unspecified location in the Western Territories. No further academic work appears under his name, and his ultimate fate remains unknown. The college abandoned the research station shortly thereafter, citing unfavorable growing conditions as the official reason. A colleague who assisted in clearing Pemberton's office after his departure later recalled finding unusual specimens preserved in sealed containers, specimens that defied easy categorization. They appeared partly vegetable, partly animal in nature, Dr. James Thornton wrote in his personal journal. Under the microscope, they exhibited cellular structures unlike anything in the established taxonomic literature. Most disturbing was their continued activity despite being separated from any apparent nutrient source, movement and growth that persisted even in a sealed environment. By common agreement among the faculty, these specimens were destroyed, though I confess a lingering doubt as to whether conventional methods would prove permanently effective against such aberrant biological material. The property changed hands several more times in the following decades, but remained largely undeveloped. A fire in 1912 destroyed what remained of the original plantation house, and the land was eventually subdivided for timber harvesting. A surveyor's account from 1923 mentions an area where vegetation grows with unusual density and exhibits characteristics inconsistent with native species. A hunter's journal from 1935 describes finding a deer carcass near what he believed to be the old well site, noting that the remains had been altered in a manner I cannot attribute to any predator known to these woods, not consumed but somehow transformed, with tissues seemingly in the process of becoming something else. Entirely? Interest in the Whitmore well might have faded entirely from historical memory had it not been for a discovery made in 1953. The precise location of the well was gradually forgotten as landmarks disappeared and the landscape changed. Yet occasional reports continued to emerge, suggesting that whatever had begun at the Whitmore well remained active beneath the surface. During construction of a paper mill on part of the former plantation lands, workers excavating for the foundation uncovered what appeared to be the remains of a stone-lined shaft. Work was temporarily halted while county officials investigated. According to the official report filed with the Chatham County Development Commission on June 17, 1953, the shaft was identified as an old well or similar water management structure approximately 30 feet in depth. The report recommended that the shaft be filled with concrete and construction allowed to proceed, which was done promptly. What the official report fails to mention, but which appears in the personal journal of site foreman Robert Jenkins, is that the excavation also uncovered a series of underground chambers extending horizontally from the main shaft. Jenkins's description matches earlier accounts of similar structures, but with the addition of disturbing new details. The chambers appear to have been designed for occupancy, Jenkins wrote. There are restraint fixtures embedded in the walls and what seems to be drainage channels in the floor. Most unsettling was the discovery of what our team initially took to be root systems that had penetrated the chambers, but which, upon closer inspection, appeared to be something else entirely, organic in nature, but unlike any root structure I've encountered in 30 years of construction work. Jenkins elaborated on these observations in subsequent entries, describing how the root structures appeared to respond to human presence. When approached with light sources, the material retreats into crevices in the stone walls, he noted. Yet, when observation is sustained, it gradually re-emerges, extending toward the observer with movements suggestive of intent rather than the passive growth typical of plant matter. One worker, Wilson, inadvertently made contact with this material and reported an immediate sensation of cold that penetrated to the bone, followed by numbness that persisted for several days. The affected area of skin developed an unusual mottled appearance that our site physician was unable to diagnose. Jenkins's journal indicates that he reported these findings to county officials, but was instructed to proceed with filling in the entire structure immediately. When I suggested preserving samples of the unusual material for scientific analysis, he noted, I was firmly told that such action would delay the project unnecessarily and potentially create unwarranted public concern. Most disturbing is Jenkins's final entry regarding the well site, written after the chambers had been filled with concrete. The material we encountered appears to have properties that defy conventional understanding, he wrote. Even as the concrete was poured, the root-like structures seemed to withdraw in a coordinated fashion, retreating deeper into the earth rather than becoming trapped in the setting mixture. I cannot escape the impression that what we discovered was not merely surviving from some past event, but actively growing, adapting, and perhaps even learning from our interactions with it. I fear that our efforts have not eliminated this anomaly, but merely driven it deeper, beyond our capacity to monitor or contain it. The paper mill was completed on schedule, operating from 1954 until its closure in 1968. During its operational years, the facility was plagued by persistent issues, equipment malfunctions, unusually high employee turnover, and what company records refer to obliquely as air quality concerns not attributable to standard manufacturing processes. Former employees, interviewed for a local history project in the early 1960s, spoke of strange occurrences within the facility, particularly in sections built directly above the filled-in well shaft. Maintenance worker Samuel Greer described sounds like fingernails on metal coming from inside the ventilation system, and water from certain pipes running dark for several minutes before clearing, leaving residue unlike any industrial contamination I've encountered. Night security guard Franklin Pierce reported more disturbing phenomena. The southern wing of the facility was always colder than the rest, regardless of the heating system settings, he recalled. Equipment stored in that area would be found rearranged, despite no authorized personnel having entered the space. Most alarming were the occasions when I heard what sounded like whispered conversations emanating from the drainage systems, never quite intelligible, but giving the distinct impression of multiple voices engaged in communication. Perhaps most concerning were the health issues reported by employees assigned to work in areas near the former well site. Medical records obtained through Freedom of Information requests in the 1990s show an unusually high incidence of skin conditions, respiratory problems, and what doctors classified as idiopathic neurological symptoms among workers in the southern wing of the facility. Several cases described symptoms similar to those reported by individuals who had investigated the well in previous decades: fatigue, disorientation, unusual dreams, and unexplained physiological changes primarily affecting the circulatory system. The mill's closure in 1968 was officially attributed to economic factors, but internal company documents obtained through a Freedom of Information request in the early 1960s tell a different story. A confidential memo from plant manager William Carter to corporate headquarters, dated February 1968, cites ongoing environmental anomalies that cannot be resolved through standard remediation procedures and unacceptably high incidence of employee health complaints specific to this location. Carter's memo includes a particularly alarming observation. Engineering teams have been unable to determine why structural elements in the southern wing continue to deteriorate at an accelerated rate. Materials that should remain stable for decades show signs of alteration after mere months of installation. Most concerning is the nature of this deterioration, which does not follow typical patterns of corrosion or decay, but rather suggests a process more akin to biological consumption, as if the building itself were being gradually digested by some organism we cannot identify. The property remained abandoned after the mill's closure, the buildings gradually succumbing to decay and vandalism. In 1965, a graduate student in history from Emory University, Margaret Sinclair, began researching the Whitmore Plantation for her doctoral dissertation. Her work represented the first comprehensive academic investigation into the property's disturbing history. Sinclair's research notes, housed in Emory University's special collections, detail her methodical approach to separating fact from folklore. She obtained permission to access restricted archives, conducted interviews with elderly residents whose families had lived in the area for generations, and even visited the abandoned paper mill site despite warnings about the structure's instability. Her field notes describe the property as maintaining an atmosphere of palpable unease, decades after the mill's closure. Vegetation surrounding the structure exhibits unusual characteristics, she wrote. Plants native to the region grow in distorted forms, with abnormal coloration and leaf structures, not documented in botanical literature. Animal life is notably absent from the immediate vicinity. No birds nest in the trees, no small mammals traverse the undergrowth. The silence itself feels deliberate rather than incidental, as if the ordinary sounds of nature have been systematically excluded from this particular location. Sinclair's most significant contribution to the Whitmore Well narrative came through her discovery of previously overlooked connections between seemingly disparate historical accounts. She established, for instance, that Augustus Whitmore had not merely studied medicine briefly, as most accounts suggested, but had spent 3 years at a university in Vienna during a period when certain faculty members were conducting controversial experiments related to the boundaries between life and death. Correspondence she uncovered between Whitmore and his European mentors suggests he returned to Georgia not as a failed medical student, but as an enthusiastic practitioner of theories considered too radical for mainstream acceptance. Her draft dissertation, titled Beneath the Surface, the Whitmore Well and Institutional Knowledge Suppression in Antebellum Georgia, assembled the various historical threads into a coherent, if disturbing, narrative. Sinclair concluded that Augustus Whitmore had indeed used the well and its connected chambers for purposes that went far beyond the bounds of conventional medical practice of the era. Evidence suggests that Whitmore, who had studied medicine briefly in Europe before returning to manage the family plantation, Sinclair wrote, was attempting to extend human life through means that violated both the medical ethics of his time and basic human dignity. His experiments, conducted on individuals who would not be missed or sought after, apparently involved surgical modifications and the application of compounds derived from both botanical sources and, more disturbingly, from human remains. In her analysis, Sinclair identified a pattern across historical accounts suggesting that Whitmore's work had focused on what she termed biological integration, the merging of human tissue with other organic materials to create hybrid entities, capable of surviving beyond normal human limitations. The consistent references across multiple independent sources to root-like structures with animate properties, she noted, suggests that Whitmore may have achieved some form of successful grafting between human and plant tissues, creating organisms that inherited characteristics from both source materials while transcending the limitations of each. Sinclair's dissertation further argues that knowledge of Whitmore's activities was deliberately suppressed by local authorities who feared the economic and social repercussions should the full truth become known. The conspiracy of silence, she wrote, extended beyond Whitmore's immediate associates to include county officials, neighboring landowners, and eventually state authorities, all of whom recognized that such revelations would permanently taint not just the property, but potentially the reputation of Savannah itself. Most controversial was Sinclair's assertion that Whitmore's experiments had achieved some manner of result, however grotesque. The persistent accounts of unusual phenomena associated with the well site, spanning more than a century, suggest that whatever process Whitmore initiated did not end with his departure or even with the passage of time, she wrote. Something remains active within that site, something that defies conventional understanding of biological processes and the finality of death. The implications of Sinclair's research extended beyond historical interest into more immediate concerns. If my analysis is correct, she concluded, then what exists beneath the former Whitmore property represents not merely a historical curiosity, but an ongoing biological anomaly that continues to develop and potentially spread. The consistent reports of health effects in individuals who come into contact with the site suggest active processes, rather than residual contamination. Most alarming is the evidence of increasing complexity in the phenomena reported over time, as if whatever persists there is not merely surviving, but evolving toward some unknown state or purpose. Sinclair's dissertation was never formally submitted. According to university records, she requested a leave of absence in April 1969, citing health concerns. She never returned to complete her degree. Her collected research materials were donated to the university by her family in 1972, along with a brief note indicating that Sinclair had abandoned academic pursuits in favor of a more private life. What this official account fails to mention is the content of Sinclair's final research journal, included among the materials but restricted from general access until 2001. The journal's entries from March 1969 describe Sinclair's growing unease as her research progressed. "I am being followed," she wrote on March 12th. "Not by a person, at least not in the conventional sense. It's a presence that I feel most strongly at night, a sensation of being observed by something that lingers just beyond the range of vision." By March 17th, Sinclair was documenting physical symptoms reminiscent of those reported by previous investigators. "The dreams have intensified," she noted. "Always the same landscape. Corridors of stone leading deeper into the earth, and at their terminus, a chamber where something waits. I wake with my heart racing, sheets soaked with perspiration. More concerning are the physical changes I've begun to notice. A persistent chill in my extremities, unusual sensitivity to light, and most alarming faint discolorations appearing along the veins in my wrists and ankles, visible beneath the skin like shadows of branching structures." Her entry on March 20th took on a more urgent tone. "The dreams have begun, always the same. I am descending into the well, but it has no bottom. And there are voices calling from below, using my name specifically. They know who I am. They know what I've discovered." As her journal continues, Sinclair's writing becomes increasingly disjointed, with passages that seem to alternate between her own voice and something else. "It spreads through water and soil," she wrote on March 23rd. "It remembers what it once was but has become something greater. Not death but transformation, not extension but transcendence. The individual bodies are merely vessels now, components in a distributed awareness that grows with each incorporation. It has been patient. It has been learning." Her final entry, dated March 27, 1969, reads simply, "I understand now why those who came too close to the truth distanced themselves so completely. The knowledge itself becomes a contagion. I'm leaving everything behind. My research, my career, even my name. May whoever finds these notes have the wisdom to leave this matter undisturbed." Medical records included with the donated materials, but similarly restricted until 2001, indicate that Sinclair had consulted a physician in the weeks before her disappearance. The doctor noted symptoms including uncharacteristic dermal changes and unexplained alterations in peripheral circulation. A blood sample analysis showed anomalous cellular structures that the physician could not readily identify. Most concerning was the doctor's observation that the patient exhibits periods of dissociation during which her affect, vocabulary, and even voice modulation appear markedly different from her baseline presentation. Attempts to locate Margaret Sinclair after her disappearance from academic life proved fruitless. A private investigator hired by her family in 1975 reported that she had apparently changed her name and established residence in an undisclosed location in the Pacific Northwest, requesting no further contact with associates from her previous life. The investigator's notes, however, express certain reservations about the individual he located. "While the subject matched Sinclair's general physical description," he wrote, "certain aspects of her appearance and demeanor raise questions as to whether this was indeed the same person. Most notably, the subject's eyes exhibited unusual characteristics, a subtle mottling in the iris that was not present in photographs of Sinclair prior to her disappearance. The land where the Whitmore Plantation once stood was eventually redeveloped in the 1980s, transformed into an industrial park with no acknowledgement of its troubled history. The precise location of the well was lost amid new construction, though some workers involved in the development reported encountering unusual soil conditions and inexplicable equipment failures in certain areas of the site. A geologist's report, commissioned during the initial development phase but excluded from public records, described anomalous conditions in the southeastern section of the property. Soil samples exhibit characteristics inconsistent with the surrounding geology, the report states. Most notably, organic content at depths where such material should be minimal or absent entirely. Microscopic analysis reveals cellular structures that defy conventional categorization, neither clearly plant nor animal, but possessing characteristics suggestive of both. These structures appeared to remain viable despite conditions that should prohibit biological activity, raising questions about the nature and origin of the material. Today, the story of the Whitmore well exists primarily as an obscure footnote in regional history, occasionally referenced in specialized publications on Southern Gothic folklore or the darker aspects of plantation life. Official histories of Savannah rarely mention it, focusing instead on the city's architectural beauty and cultural heritage. Yet, in certain academic circles, the case remains a subject of quiet fascination, not merely for its macabre elements, but for what it suggests about institutional knowledge suppression and the lengths to which communities will go to protect their preferred narratives. The scattered documentation, fragmentary as it is, points to deliberate efforts across generations to minimize, dismiss, or actively conceal the full truth of what transpired on that property. Perhaps most disturbing is the consistency with which those who investigated too deeply subsequently removed themselves from the inquiry. Tate the surveyor, who never again mentioned his discoveries; Pemberton, the soil scientist, who abandoned a promising academic career; Morton, the surveyor, who succumbed to mysterious illness; and finally Sinclair, who chose to erase her former identity rather than continue her research. The pattern suggests not merely fear of professional ridicule, but something more profound, a recognition that some knowledge exacts a personal cost too great to bear. As Sinclair noted in her research, the true horror of the Whitmore well may lie not in what was done there, but in the possibility that its effects somehow persist, independent of their originator's presence or the passage of time. In 1968, shortly before the paper mill was permanently closed, an anonymous employee submitted an unusual incident report that was quickly suppressed by management but preserved in personal records later donated to the Chatham County Historical Society. The report described maintenance work conducted near the sealed well shaft after hours. The concrete plug had developed cracks, the report states, from which issued not water, as might be expected, but a sound that I can only describe as similar to distant conversation, though no distinct words could be discerned. More alarming was the movement detected within these cracks, something that appeared to be reaching upward, exhibiting characteristics of both plant matter and something else entirely. When touched with a tool, the material recoiled as if sensitive to contact. The employee reported the discovery to his supervisor, who allegedly instructed him to apply additional concrete sealant and make no further mention of the incident. The report concludes with an observation that haunts investigators to this day. Whatever lies beneath that seal does not rest. It waits, and I fear it grows stronger with the passage of time. Perhaps this is why the story of the Whitmore well refuses to remain buried despite generations of official dismissal. It persists in historical records and local memory like a wound that will not heal, a reminder that beneath the cultivated beauty and historical charm of places like Savannah, darker truths may lie concealed, waiting for someone curious or unfortunate enough to uncover them. Companies that establish facilities in certain sections of the property tend to relocate within a few years, citing vague reasons such as unfavorable operating conditions or employee retention challenges. Environmental assessments conducted in the 1990s noted persistent issues with water quality in wells drilled within the park, with analysis showing unexplained organic compounds and microscopic particulates of unknown origin that conventional filtration systems failed to remove. The industrial park built over the former plantation grounds has itself experienced unusual patterns over the decades. A study conducted by the Georgia Environmental Protection Division in 2004, its findings filed but never publicly released, described an area approximately a quarter-mile in radius where soil and groundwater conditions defied normal classification. The affected zone exhibits a biological profile unlike surrounding areas, the report states. Microorganisms collected from samples show unusual genetic structures and behavioral patterns that suggest adaptation to conditions not typical of the region's ecology. More concerning is the apparent mobility of these organisms through groundwater systems with evidence of migration beyond the initially affected area. The final twist in this disturbing narrative emerged in 1967 when a historical researcher examining the Whitmore family records discovered that Augustus Whitmore had left Savannah not for New Orleans as commonly believed, but had briefly relocated to Charleston before disappearing from historical record entirely. More significantly, the researcher uncovered evidence suggesting that Whitmore had studied not conventional medicine during his time in Europe, but had instead sought instruction from practitioners of more esoteric arts. Correspondence between Whitmore and an unidentified European mentor, dated 1836, contains references to the transmutation of essence from vessel to vessel, and methods by which the vital spark might be sustained indefinitely, independent of the body's natural decline. These phrases, cryptic as they are, suggest that Whitmore's eventual experiments represented the practical application of theories developed years before his return to Georgia. A journal fragment, preserved among Whitmore's papers and dated 1838, provides disturbing insight into his evolving philosophy. The conventional boundaries between botanical and animal life are more permeable than common science acknowledges, he wrote. The principles of vitality that animate all living things might be extracted, combined, and reimplanted to create entities that transcend the limitations of their original forms. What might emerge from such a union would represent not merely an extension of existing life, but the genesis of something entirely new, a living system capable of indefinite perpetuation and adaptation. What became of Augustus Whitmore himself remains unknown. No death certificate was ever filed. No grave marker bears his name. The last verified reference to him appears in a ship's manifest from 1848, listing him as a passenger bound for the Caribbean. After that, silence, as if he, like so many associated with the well's dark history, had chosen to vanish rather than face the consequences of his actions or discoveries. A curious footnote to this mystery emerged in 1892, when a physician in New Orleans documented a case that bears striking similarities to accounts associated with the Whitmore well. Dr. Antoine Leblanc described treating an elderly patient suffering from a condition defying conventional diagnosis, characterized by unusual circulatory patterns and dermal alterations suggesting a hybridized organic structure. Most notable was Leblanc's observation that the patient's blood, when examined microscopically, contained structures reminiscent of plant vasculature integrated with normal human cells. What makes this case particularly intriguing is the patient's reported claim during periods of delirium to have initiated a process in Georgia that would ultimately transform the very conception of life and death. The patient reportedly died during treatment, but Leblanc's subsequent notes indicate that the body exhibited unusual resistance to normal decomposition processes and was ultimately disposed of through methods typically reserved for potentially contagious materials rather than standard funerary practices. Whether this individual was indeed Augustus Whitmore remains speculation, but the temporal and circumstantial connections are difficult to dismiss entirely. If Whitmore did survive into the late 19th century, experiencing firsthand the long-term effects of his own experiments, it would add yet another layer of horror to an already disturbing narrative, suggesting that the creator himself ultimately became subject to the processes he had initiated. And so the story ends, or perhaps merely pauses, awaiting the next chapter. The Whitmore Well, wherever it now lies beneath layers of concrete and development, remains a testament to how effectively disturbing truths can be buried, not through complete erasure, but through fragmentation, official dismissal, and the natural human tendency to turn away from that which disturbs our preferred understanding of the world. For those who have followed the scattered evidence and pieced together this narrative, a question inevitably arises. What if the most terrifying aspect of this story is not what happened in 1841, but the possibility that whatever began then continues still beneath the surface of our everyday awareness, waiting for circumstances that might once again bring it to light? Environmental monitoring reports from the industrial park site, conducted annually but rarely examined in detail, show subtle but persistent changes in soil and water composition within a gradually expanding radius. Biological samples reveal organisms that defy standard taxonomy, entities that seem to incorporate genetic material from multiple kingdoms of life, integrated in ways that conventional evolutionary processes cannot readily explain. They describe dreams of descending into darkness and encounters with entities that speak without sound. Medical records show a higher than normal incidence of unusual circulatory conditions among long-term employees, characterized by what one physician described as vascular architectures that deviate from standard human anatomy in ways that suggest adaptive modification rather than congenital abnormality. These contemporary accounts, disconnected as they may seem from events of the 1840s, suggest a continuous thread linking past-present, a lingering influence that neither time nor concrete barriers have fully contained. Perhaps most unsettling are the occasional reports from workers at facilities built near the presumed location of the original well. Whatever Augustus Whitmore initiated in that well nearly 2 centuries ago appears to persist, not as a static remnant of historical wrongdoing, but as an evolving presence that continues to adapt, expand, and perhaps even think in ways fundamentally different from conventional consciousness. Perhaps it is better that some depths remain unplumbed, some wells left sealed. As Margaret Sinclair wrote in her final research notes before disappearing from academic life, there are forms of knowledge for which the human mind is not equipped, not because we lack the intellect to comprehend them, but because true comprehension would transform us into something no longer recognizably human. For those who dismiss this account as mere folklore or historical exaggeration, a final consideration remains. The documented pattern of individuals who investigated the Whitmore well and subsequently vanished, changed identity, or died under unusual circumstances spans more than a century. Too consistent to be attributed to mere coincidence, too persistent to be dismissed as superstition. The well's legacy suggests that some boundaries exist not to constrain human knowledge, but to protect humanity itself from what lies beyond conventional understanding. In the words of Dr. Elias Pemberton, before he abandoned his academic career and disappeared into obscurity, what we categorize as life and death may be merely limited perceptions of a more complex continuum, one in which consciousness and physical form exist in more fluid relationships than our current science acknowledges. If this is so, then what Whitmore discovered was not merely a method of extending existence, but a door into a state of being for which we have no name and, perhaps more mercifully than we realize, no natural access. The industrial park built over the former Whitmore Plantation continues to operate today, its occupants largely unaware of what may still exist beneath their feet. The well itself, wherever it now lies, remains sealed, its contents contained but perhaps not truly imprisoned. And in libraries and archives throughout the region, fragments of its story wait to be discovered by those with the curiosity, persistence, and courage to assemble them into a coherent whole. For those who do, a question lingers. If something still exists within or around that well, something that represents Whitmore's terrible legacy, is it truly confined to that location, or has it, over generations, found ways to extend its influence beyond physical boundaries? The consistent pattern of investigators encountering similar symptoms, dreams, and compulsions suggests a mechanism of transmission that transcends simple physical contact, as if knowledge itself might serve as a vector, carrying some essence of the anomaly from mind to mind across time and distance. In that light, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Whitmore Well narrative is not merely what happened there in 1841, but the possibility that through these very accounts, something of its influence continues to spread, reaching through historical records and retold stories to touch new minds, extend its awareness, and perpetuate whatever transformation Augustus Whitmore first set in motion nearly 2 centuries ago.